In the previous tutorial, we used the HSL secondary controls to isolate and correct a problem caused in camera. In this tutorial, we'll make secondary corrections to fix other kinds of issues that require the use of HSL isolations, masks, and trackers. So let's dive right in. In this first example, I went ahead and performed a primary color correction so that our starting point is neutral and balanced. But compared to the rest of the image, the yellow graffiti is oversaturated and taking away too much attention from our talent. Now, if we were to lower the overall saturation, that would make our subjects look unhealthy. So instead, what we want to do is to perform a secondary or isolated correction on just the yellow graffiti and lower its saturation, and we'll do that using the HSL secondary controls. So let's open the HSL secondary panel, click on this eyedropper, and then click on any part of the yellow to qualify it. Let's turn on the highlight mode by clicking here, and then begin refining our key with the HSL sliders. I'm going to start with the Luma control. And what I'm doing here is expanding the tonal range of our target so we can capture all that brightness. Next, I'll move to the saturation. This will just take a moment. There, I think we have a nice key. Let's finish it off by increasing the denoise filter and by adding a slight blur to the matte. Let's turn off the highlight feature. Okay, so now that we've qualified our target hue, let's move down to the correction tools and begin pulling back on the saturation. As I do that, keep an eye on the trace and the vector scope. What we want to do is to bring it down until it's just slightly less saturated than the red levels in our image. Here's the before and after. It's subtle, but already makes a big difference. Next, let's say we want to have some fun with this by adjusting the hue of the yellow, and the reason we may want to do this is because the skin tones contain the colors of red and yellow. So by reducing the amount of bright yellow in the background, we can help our talent to stand out better in the frame. We'll adjust the hue by dragging the temperature slider towards blue, and then adjust the tint towards cyan. Wow, that's getting funky, but I kind of like it. For the finishing touch, let's pull back on the saturation a bit more and then add a slight vignette. Let's see the before and after. Nice! It changes the look of this shot, and I encourage you to see what you can come up with using the exercise files. In our next example, I went ahead and applied a grade to make this image look more dramatic, but the effect that the grade is having is it's making our talent look pale with a green color cast. So let's isolate our talent's skin tone and make a secondary isolated correction to add warmth back into her face. Let's select the eyedropper, then select a point on her face to qualify the key, and then we can turn on the highlight. Next, let's select the eyedropper with the plus sign, and what I'll do is right-click and hold the mouse button down while I drag the eyedropper around her face. What this does is it will sample more of her skin tone color and expand the key of the hue, saturation, and luma. Now let's finesse our key with the luma slider, then the saturation slider, and then add some denoise and blur. At this point, we've done a good job of qualifying her skin tones, but you'll notice that our key is picking up parts of the frame that we don't want. So to fix this, let's select the Bezier pen and create a mask to further qualify our isolation. I'll begin to carefully draw a mask around just the skin tones of our talent. Please give me a moment while I do that. Okay, now with the mask complete, we further qualified the HSL key and isolated only the skin tones inside of the mask. This strategy is one that I think that you'll use more often than not when your HSL qualifier picks up unwanted sections of an image that are outside of the areas that you want to isolate. Moving on, let's turn off the highlight mode and press this button here to select the three-way color wheels. Starting with the highlights, let's add some warmth back into her skin tones by pushing our color towards orange, and do the same to the midtones. To see our progress so far, let's look at the before and after. We've been able to add more life into her face, and at the same time, we've created nice color contrast with the rest of the image. But we're not done yet. I'm going to select the mask in the effects window, and then drag the playhead through our shot. You can see that our camera is stationary, but our talent is moving in and out of the mask that we just created, so we're going to have to track this one. The other thing is, when we get to the end of the shot, her hand actually comes into the frame, so after we finish tracking our first mask, we'll need to create a second window for her hand and then track that one too. Let's place the playhead on the first frame of this clip. Make sure that our mask is selected, and begin tracking forward by pressing the Track Forward button. Now the first mask has been tracked. Let's select the Bezier pen and begin drawing a window around her hand. You'll notice that as soon as we completed drawing the mask, the same color correction we applied to our talent's face is now applied to her hand. Just to be sure, let's turn on the highlight mode, and as you can see, the skin tone on her hand has been isolated and corrected. Let's turn the highlight mode back off. With our mask selected, let's track our image by pushing the Track Backward button. It does a pretty good job tracking until just before her hand goes off screen. So let's manually adjust the track by placing the playhead on the frames that need to be corrected and by repositioning the vertices. And I just want to remind you that when you track forward or backward, the tracker automatically generates keyframes. So now when you manually reposition the mask, it will save your changes. Okay, once her hand is completely out of frame, we can position the mask off screen. And then get rid of the keyframes we no longer need by using the cursor to lasso them and by pressing the delete key. Let's play the clip back. Alright, that worked really well. In our final example, we're going to make this car stand out from the background by performing an isolated correction using two instances of Lumetri. With the HSL secondary panels open, let's select the eyedropper, and then select a color point on the car. Next, let's turn on the highlight mode, select the eyedropper with the plus sign, and begin expanding our target isolation. Okay, because we're picking up a lot of unwanted areas in the image, let's refine our key with the HSL sliders, this time starting with the hue. By adjusting the center of the hue slider, we're able to narrow down our target hue. I'm also going to sharpen the feather of our hue slider, just so that our target is more precise. Next, let's adjust the saturation slider, then the luma, and finish by increasing the denoise filter and adding some blur. Now when we move the playhead around on this clip, we can see some shadows and reflections on the car, making it difficult to get a perfect key. But I'm not too concerned about this because I don't think the noise will be visible when we're finished. Let's turn off the highlight feature. What we want to do now is isolate the rest of the image outside of our key. We could try doing that by creating a new instance of Lumetri and use the eyedropper to qualify other hues in the tonal range, but that would be time consuming and not nearly as accurate as the method I'm going to show you now. Let's select the first instance of our Lumetri effect, then copy it using Command-C on a Mac or Control-C if you're working on Windows. Then we'll paste it using Command-V on a Mac or Control-V if you're on Windows to create a second copy of Lumetri. So what we want to do now is we want to invert our first key so that we can perform a secondary correction to everything outside the region that we've already qualified. Let's click on this button to invert our key. Now what I want to point out is that effects are processed in a top-down fashion in Premiere Pro. So the second instance of Lumetri that we just added here is now displayed in the Lumetri color panel. And then if we need to make further changes to the first instance of Lumetri, then we'll need to do that using the Lumetri controls that are located here in the Effect Controls panel. Okay, to keep things organized, let's rename the second instance of Lumetri by right-clicking on the effect header here, selecting Rename, and let's call this Background. Next, let's make our correction by adjusting the temperature slider towards blue to cool things off. And adjust the tint towards magenta. Then lower the saturation. Next, let's make a small correction to the car using the HSL tools in the first instance of Lumetri, and remember, that's located in the Effect Controls panel. Let's press this button to select the three-way color wheels, then slightly raise the highlights, then the mids. Here's the before and after. Big difference, and let's play it back too. That's looking great. Well, I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Knowing how to make the most of secondary tools in Premiere Pro is going to help you take your color grading to the next level. Like anything else, practice will make us better, and I hope you take the time to experiment with the exercise files that I've included so that you can get better. Thanks for watching.